Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is sort of an impromptu stream, and let me just make sure that all the setup is working properly. So, I just wanted to pop on to talk about something that has been on my mind very recently. Howdy, howdy. Um, so several things happened very recently, which all kind of intersected at the same thought that I was having. So one is that I'm in the middle of finishing up the editing for my Elden Ring critique, and I realized as I was going over it that I never mentioned one thing about Elden Ring which slightly bothers me, and I'm glad that I didn't put it in the critique because I don't really know how to talk about it in a very concise manner. But basically, it's just the fact that it's changed considerably since it was released, with all these patches and updates. And in some places that's it's something. It's just like a value change where the amount of damage that a certain weapon does, or a certain status effect, or the speed of a weapon, little balance tweaks and things like that. Um, uh, those things have been changed, but in some ways it's considerably larger. I mean, the whole town of Jarburg was an addition. There are NPCs which have been added, quests which have been elaborated upon, or in some places completed because they weren't finished when the game released. And there's something slightly unsatisfying about the fact that the game that released is not. I don't know how to refer to Elden Ring really, because the game that released and the game that is being played now are not really the same game. Now, I mean, most of these changes are small, relatively speaking. They're not fundamental changes to the game, but this was part of my thought process. Then several other things happened. One thing is this whole deal with CD Projekt Red and the Cyberpunk. So there's this new series, Cyberpunk series, and that has inspired some people to come back and play the game, which now has been patched to the point where it seems playable. I haven't played Cyberpunk at all, so I can't really speak too much about it. It never seemed that interesting to me, and then the disaster of its release turned me off. If I had been interested in it at all, that completely turned me off. But this is also an example of something where the state that it was released in and where it is now is completely different. And then something else happened, and this is why I have Minecraft open right now, which is that just for nostalgia's sake, I decided to open up a Minecraft map, which I, I I don't really play. I haven't played that much in the last few years, probably, but every so often I'll just go and look at some of my old worlds, just for nostalgia, just to kind of remind myself what it looked like. And so I opened up this map on the I'm on the Switch right now, and I was just shocked by how bad the game is. It's just really just completely broken. And this is something I think it was probably in something like this state or close to it when I last played anyway. So it's not something that has changed dramatically. And that's part of the reason why it's a little bit shocking to me. I think, so you can see all the different chunks loading in at the moment. And slowly building out the game world. The section over to the left is not building. Oh, there we go. Chunks are building, coming into view. Now, if you look at a game and half of the world is not being rendered, that's a broken game. I mean, this is broken if the world is not being rendered. Yeah, this is not an acceptable condition for a game. I don't understand, because Minecraft is maybe I think it's still the most popular game in the world. Right? There are millions of people playing it. Now, some of those people may be playing on high-end computers, and some of them may be, may just have better systems, better graphics cards, and I'm sure that helps considerably. But this seems, not being someone in game dev, but understanding a little bit about it, this seems like something to do with the game engine rather than the hardware, the way that it's prioritizing certain things. And this is not something that I remember being the case in the original Minecraft. I guess it's hard to say what the original was. It's constantly updated. So, the first time that I played was probably around 2011, 2012. It wasn't too far after it came out. So, it was basically, there was stone, there was dirt, there was one type of tree. Maybe birch trees existed then, I can't remember. It was much more limited than it is now. And then since then, a lot of different updates have been applied to it, especially since Mojang was bought by Microsoft. And so what they've added all sorts of stuff in the water. There's different types of fish. There's a bunch more animals. There's all sorts of additional things that you can craft. There's all this, there's the end and all that kind of stuff, and all the kind of adventure-y elements to it. There's bees, and now there's the caves thing, which is also, you can see a bit of it, I think, underneath here. Oh no, that's actually mine. That's something I created. So now instead of just having one type of stone, you've got all these, I don't know, diorite or whatever it's called, and granite, and andesite, and all sorts of things. And so over time, the amount of content in the game has been dramatically increased. I mean, it's probably something like, in terms of just the number of assets that are in the game, forget about how they work mechanically, but just the number of assets, instead of maybe there were probably 10 block types originally, something around there. I might be underestimating that, but it's probably not too far off. And now there's probably something more like 60, 70. The number of animals has quadrupled. The number of just everything has drastically multiplied. And part of the effect of that is you have this. Because the game engine that Notch built was designed for a very, very simple game. I mean, I think originally it wasn't even infinite. The world wasn't infinite. Although I don't think I played on the limited world. I think I started playing after it became infinite. But, the game engine wasn't built to handle lots of complicated assets, and shading and lighting. And since, over time, since Notch sort of disappeared from the scene, and since Microsoft bought Mojang, they have added more and more stuff to this system. and the engine just can't handle it. And this, I don't know. I don't follow the Minecraft community at all, so I don't know if this is something that people regularly talk about. But I haven't really come across it. Just the fact that this game is completely broken. I mean, this is broken. What you're looking at. If this happened in any other game, and this is the most popular game in the world right now. If this happened in any other game, if you played Assassin's Creed and just as a consistent feature of the game, half of what you're looking at would not be loaded, there would be an outcry. It would be, people would think this is the most ridiculous broken game ever. People complain about like clipping in games, and this is way beyond clipping. This is just the game is not there. Like the game is not here. It's not loading the game in. You can't actually play it, and you're actually prevented from going further until it loads in the map. And it's also an issue of, and I mean, so there's a couple things. I mean, obviously the Switch is not a particularly powerful console, and that's an intentional decision by Nintendo because they've always chosen to prioritize other things than, let's say, graphical fidelity, among other things. But graphical fidelity in particular, and they've always chosen to prioritize maybe performance over spectacle, or the look of the game. Generally, their games are fairly simple. They're not high quality models. Everything is compared to a game like Uncharted or The Last of Us or something like that. It's very, there are very few Nintendo games that have incredibly detailed models or textures or even lighting systems sometimes. So it makes sense that the Switch would be a little less powerful because it doesn't need to be, and then that allows them to shrink it down in size and have something more portable and cheaper. But I don't know how many people are playing Minecraft on Switch at the moment, but this is not the most complex world that you can build. Like, I spent a fair amount of time in this world back in the day because this is actually all created in survival mode. But this is not by any means the most complex world that you could build, and people must have much more complicated worlds out there that they're running on the Switch. And I just can't imagine that, like, how... I don't understand why I haven't heard more of an outcry about this. And I think the only reason is because it's like the frog in boiling water, that it's happened so gradually that as with each new update, everything's been, a few things have been added here and there. There have been some bigger updates as well, but and with each one, it's stretching the limits of what the game can handle. And by the way, this is not on any kind of complicated graphic settings. I think I even have certain things turned off. So let's see. Let's turn on fancy leaves. Let's turn on beautiful skies. Let's turn on fancy graphics, and let's see how the game runs. Okay, so now we have an FPS drop to about, I don't know, well, that was about 10 FPS. Now it seems to be smooth again. But I just don't understand how people can think that this is completely fine. Or it kind of blows my mind. You don't have rendering issues when you play? Maybe there's something specific to my Switch which is making this happen. I don't know if this is a common problem or not. So maybe I'm just crying about nothing. From what I remember, this has been increasingly an issue. um, like I said, it's been at least a year since I've really played properly, um, and I think this was always an issue as time went on. It got worse and worse, and I mean this is not something anybody should be happy with. But maybe there is something specific to my console. I don't know. If anyone else plays on Switch, I'd be curious to know if that's the case. Um, but it also it there's something. How's it going, Eridan? Thanks for popping in. I'm just this is a whining stream. I'm whining about things. Um, happens on your Switch too. Okay, good to know. But see, this is something that has been much more of an issue in games of late. I've just noticed more and more that games are being released that where some major part of it just doesn't function, or there's glitches that completely break the game, or corrupt save files or things like that. And this just maybe I'm more I just notice it more now. That's possible, but it feels like it's happening more and more frequently. I mean, when Skyrim came out, it was this big deal and it was a huge open world, and there's a tremendous number of bugs there. I mean, the Bethesda games are just completely buggy. But at least, compared to Minecraft, what Skyrim did was they allowed players to come in and create mods, which is a fairly courageous thing to do. And you'll notice that for any system, the main mod for the most popular mod for any of the systems is the unofficial patch, which is just fixing bugs, and then you get things like connecting the towns so that you don't have a loading screen. But even with any kind of patches that you can put in, there's still huge problems where quests will just stop working. You have to reload an earlier save. There's one in particular that I really love in Skyrim where if you do the Dawn Guard quest and you walk a little bit too fast as you lead Serana to the castle Volkihar, then the quest line will just break. And the only way, unless you reload to an earlier point, the only way to get past it is if you take a flat object like a platter, hold it up to the gate, and then use Whirlwind Sprint to clip through the mesh. I just enjoy doing that. That's kind of fun. Totally broken game in many ways, but this just seems to be more and more of an issue as time goes on. Halo Infinite is another one which recently, they promised people after Halo 5 that split screen would always be in every Halo game, and of course they didn't do it. And then they promised that they would add split screen, and then they decided not to. That is just not so much a bug thing, but just an issue with developers maybe overreaching, and in general that game is filled with problems. They're minor. I don't even want to call them bugs so much. They're not so many bugs, but there are minor problems with it. And clearly they cut out a tremendous amount of content because they couldn't make it work. That was also something that went through development hell because I think 5 separate teams, huge teams, worked on that game. So, but I it's just this issue of longevity that I've been thinking about. What makes a game last? And it seems to me that it's become totally normalized now to release a game in an incomplete condition and kind of patch some things later on, and everybody seems to be relatively fine about this. I mean, maybe there's a little bit of backlash here and there, but the trend has been towards a shift in priorities. Um, I went back and played some PS3 games in the past few weeks. Jack and Daxter for one, and Demon Souls, and it's funny with Demon Souls, people complain that that's like a janky game. So that's a common criticism of that game, that there's something about it is janky, and I've never really understood that, because it seems no jankier than Dark Souls 1. But there's no game breaking bugs in that. There's no point at which the blue screen of death appears, or a save file is deleted. I've never encountered that, certainly. I'm just reading some comments right now. I think it's only for Switch. Well, the same issue with chunk loading times also happens on my Xbox, Xbox One. It's not as bad as on Switch, but certainly for the more complicated worlds, it happens as well, and especially if you're traveling quickly. And it's, by the way, it's not just loading times, it is the memory, because I can wait for this section of the map to load, and then if I go across to the other side, it will deload, especially if I'm not looking at it, because the game doesn't want to store that much in its memory. So yeah. Anyway, I'm just thinking about longevity and what makes a game last, and it seems that, especially with how a lot of games are just digital now, or at least they have a strong digital element. Even if you buy a disc, you're going to get updates online. You're going to have to download stuff onto your system digitally. And there's something very unsatisfying about the fact that you're not really playing a game anymore. You're playing something which is sort of constantly changing. It's never the same. And I don't think this has to be the case. I mean, Halo 3 came out in 2007, and I've never encountered a single bug in that game. Now, a part of that playtime in the past 5 years, a good chunk of that has been on the Master Chief Collection, which is obviously different in some ways. And Master Chief Collection has its own bugs, but within Halo 3, I've never encountered a single bug. If you remember, do you think Assassin's Creed Unity got the deserved hate, or was it OTT? I think the state it released in is nowhere near how bad modern releases are today. I've never followed the Assassin's Creed games too closely. I've always found the mechanics very simplistic. But that story rings very true, because that does seem to be the case. How in the past, people, the sorts of things that people complained about are just regular occurrences now, and they're kind of unnoticed. And so what I wanted to suggest is that there's a few reasons why this trend might be happening. Now, I'm not in game dev, so I can't, there's lots of the inner workings of it that I can't speak to. I've tried messing around a little bit with learning how to make games in Unity, but very, very basic stuff. I have a few ideas about why games might be more broken now, and you can push back against this point, because it may be that I'm just I'm seeing things from my perspective, and I'm not getting the full picture. But it does seem like games are more broken. That there are more obvious glitches, more obvious bugs. Games are being released in incomplete states. And also, in the case of Minecraft, being stretched, for obvious commercial purposes in a way that uh, detracts from the game. That's not even a strong enough word. I think it essentially ruins the game. Um, so there's a couple reasons. One is the actual framework with which to build these games. So that for each of the consoles and the type of equipment that you use. So if you've ever opened up Unity or Unreal Engine or something like that, um, if you know nothing about game dev, you will instantly be overwhelmed by the amount of things that you can do with it. There's just a tremendous number of options, a tremendous amount of jargon, very difficult to get a handle on. I've spent a decent amount of time in Unity, and there's still, I think I understand less than 0.1% of just that program, just that API. So, and that this is something that only gets more and more confusing. Unreal Engine is actually not that dissimilar to Unity, but there's when you make a tool to build something, if you learn how to make it, let me restart this. If you were building a game back when video games were first starting, you basically have to create everything yourself, right? You have to create the code for absolutely everything. How all the mechanics work, all the math that's governing them, and how that's being rendered to the screen. This is something you have to build essentially from scratch. And that means that in order to create a game, you have to understand every single element of it. Because if you don't, you can't build it. You can't use something that doesn't exist. But as time has gone on, there are more and more tools that are being used to speed up the process and speed up the process for more and more complex games. So, for instance, if you want to create a texture for something, well, it's fairly easy to attend to a texture that's, 32 by 32 pixels, right? Because there's only so many pixels. You can see them all on your screen. You can change them by hand if you want to, and you can mess around with that. But if you're starting to deal with textures that are in 4K, and then not only do you have that texture, but maybe you've got a diffuse map and a normal map, and you've got a light map, and then you've got all sorts of different shaders that are working on that, and then that might change depending on the context, and that's interacting with the lighting system, and now suddenly what was something that you could isolate and work on in detail, you have to start using tools that do things in shortcuts, that do things for you, that anticipate your needs, and sometimes they anticipate correctly, and sometimes they don't. And I think this is true of programming as well. And there's all sorts of things which, you can't build a game like, let's say, Elden Ring from scratch. You just can't do that. So if you want to build a map that size, like if you wanted to do that by hand, just the mesh for the map, that would take so long, and it would be so completely useless to spend that much time on it, because you can just use these easy shortcut tools. And so that's what they did with Elden Ring. They used it's not exactly procedural generation, but it's something similar to that. I don't remember exactly what it was, but they used something that essentially they did a combination of building things by hand and a kind of procedural generation or something like that to create the world, because there's too much detail. In the same way that, like, if you tried to build this Minecraft map by hand, it would just take you forever, just to place every tree down and to make sure that everything's working in the right way. So you just use an algorithm to do it, and that's the whole appeal of Minecraft, is that it can just generate everything algorithmically. And the same thing goes for every aspect of game development, that there's all sorts of presets and built-in assets, built-in ways of doing things in the different APIs, and you do get in indie games a little bit of people developing their own game engines and things like that, but a lot of it is streamlined, and so that means that when you completely understand what the program is doing and how it's streamlining things, and you understand how to use it and how it's anticipating your specific design, and maybe how it's not, then there's no problem. But if you don't fully understand that, and you don't fully understand how maybe it's doing things that you don't want it to do, or maybe it's not doing things that you want it to do, then you run into problems. And then this comes to another point, which is that the tools have become the teacher. Well, this is the thing, I think, with any kind of tech, a lot of what you're doing is learning how the programs work. Because you can't become, the amount of time that it takes to become really proficient in a single program. There's a great talk at one of the GDC talks. The guy's a bit annoying, but he's an artist who used to do, I'm going to refer to this the wrong way, but essentially like 8-bit art. Back in the day, he's a little bit, he's got a bit of an ego, so he's difficult to listen to. But he tells a very interesting story, because he basically got comfortable working with one program. He was working with this one program for 10 years. This was like in the 80s, back when games were much simpler. And he got extremely proficient at this one program. And the thing is, you can't do that anymore, because the games are just way too complex. You can't get proficient at one part of it, and you also can't be a generalist either, because you need to have specific knowledge in certain areas. So what happens instead is that you have gigantic teams that are dealing with games. So Halo 1, which came out in 2001, the team was like 10 people, not including quality assurance. And then Halo 3, that sort of quintupled in size, and now with the Halo games, well, Halo Infinite, like I said, I think there were 5 totally different teams, and I'm talking teams like of hundreds of people working on that game. And this is the case for most games. If you look at the credits for a game now, it's the size of a Hollywood movie. Like, there's thousands of people working on a single game. And so what does that mean for it? Well, again, I'm not in game dev, so I can't speak from experience, but there's a general rule, which is, imagine that you're going out to lunch with your friends, and let's say there's 3 of you. All right, it takes you maybe 2 minutes to come to a decision about where to go, because you're just sort of negotiating. Oh, I don't like that place, and that place is pretty good, but they're a bit expensive, and let's do Mexican instead, whatever. Then if you have like 6 people, then it takes you 5 minutes, maybe 10 minutes to to come to a decision. And if you're trying to go to lunch with like 30 people, well, either someone has to decide for everyone, and and some people get left out because of that, or it will just take you hours to figure out where to go, because there's the ability to negotiate between large groups of people is not good. Communication takes much, much longer. It's difficult enough to communicate with one person one-on-one. That has its own problems. And then the more people that you add to that, it becomes exponentially more difficult. And this is the case in any kind of environment. If you're in any position where you're dealing with lots of people, the biggest issue is always going to be communication, because it's just not everyone is getting the same information, not everyone has the same perspective, and you have to be able to negotiate between all those different perspectives. And when you have a team that's thousands of people. Okay, well, how does that work? You obviously have it organized in some kind of hierarchy. So, maybe you have a lead for, you have a lead programmer, you have a lead, um, art design, lead narrative, lead, in every sort of major area. And then you have some sort of, alongside that, you have some people that are dealing in the kind of in between areas. So, um, what would you call it? Like visual programmer, people that deal with shaders and things like that. Um, uh, Kind of in between programming and art design and everybody sort of, so you maybe actually only have 10, 15, 20 people that are really at the top of things, and then under them are sub teams, and under those people are sub teams, and they're all working on, and then eventually it gets down to the very bottom where you have like one person that's working on the a single shader for how like the grass moves in the wind in daylight, like something really specific, right? And that's their project for like 3 months. So it becomes, you get this division of labor where everyone's working on something really specific. And the thing about the way that hierarchies work is that the more people are involved, the less information every single person gets. So the person that's working on the grass shader doesn't have a sense of the whole game because they can't, right? They're specializing. They're only looking at this one particular aspect of the game. They don't know how the quest mechanics work, and or how the menu is going to work, or how things are being saved in the game. They don't know how the music is going to, or the sound effects, anything like that. They don't have, maybe they have some vague sense of it because they're sort of hearing from people, but that's not critical information for their specialized skill set. So they're not paying attention to all this other information. And ideally what you have is that the people at the very top are kind of getting the most relevant information from all of their sources. So all of the people under them are it's like in an office, in any kind of workplace. That's how ideally you want the hierarchy to work, is that the people at the top are getting all the information, technically not all of it because there's lots of information which isn't relevant to their decisions, but they're getting the most relevant information from every single section under their purview. And then those people communicate. But the thing is, the more complicated that gets, the more information is filtered out. And so there's fewer and fewer people that have a really detailed picture of what's going on. Maybe they have the information to make relevant decisions, but so for an example would be, so maybe you're the lead, I don't know, art design person, and you've got people that are doing concept art, you've got people that are dealing with textures, and you've got people that are dealing with lighting, and you've got people that are dealing with shaders, and they all have to work together because all of these things interact, obviously. And then you also have to be able to communicate with other people in programming, because okay, what can the system handle, and maybe someone at the top decided to implement some new mechanic which is now taxing the system way more, and now suddenly we have to make cutbacks in these other areas. So now the lighting system, we can't have these incredible dynamic lightings, or like the shadows are incredibly taxing on systems. So maybe we have to the resolution of shadows has to be cut down, or maybe so you have to have all this communication back and forth. But the more complicated the game gets and the more detailed the game gets, the less information you can get as the lead of all this. You just can't know all of the fine details that each of these people are working on. You can't know what all the different problems of what this particular grass shader is doing and what it's not doing, where it's broken, where it's not quite working, why it's not optimized. Maybe you get a general gist of it, but you've also got 500 other things that you have to pay attention to. So you're just getting a summary of what's going on. You don't have a full understanding of it. And I think this is the main reason that that games are becoming more and more janky as time goes on, because there's just isn't a way for someone at the top, and you do get people like Miyazaki or Ueda or maybe Kamiya or someone like that, especially in Japanese games, where you got sort of auteurs, people that have a really clear vision and they want to look at every single aspect of everything. They're sort of obsessive about it, and even in those games, I mean, you look at the Souls games. There's all sorts of issues. There's all sorts of little bugs and things like this that aren't necessarily game breaking. If the team had more time to refine things, then they would be able to fix them, presumably. Although some of it may have to just do with very basic things. It's not always the case that I don't want to make it seem like every bug can be easily fixed. There's some things are so baked in to the fundamental code that, like, if you wanted to change it, you would have to change everything about the game. There's certain things, some things are easy to fix and some things aren't, and some things, if you fix them, it would cause problems in other areas. But someone like Miyazaki, he just doesn't prioritize certain things. He prioritizes, the feel of the game, the mechanics, how certain experiences feel. He doesn't necessarily prioritize like super high graphical fidelity. He doesn't, pushing that to its limits. That's not one of his priorities, and that's an artistic decision. But I think that the more complicated these games get, and the more they rely on teams and less on a single driving vision, the more likely they are to run into bugs. And also, I think there's a tremendous pressure towards marketing games. And so the way that you market a game, well, you can't market a game based on how it feels to play it. I mean, I guess you could if you want to. You can release a demo, but generally speaking, your marketing is going to be rely on very, very small, narrow, either pictures or short videos that can be, maybe they're processed, maybe they're specifically chosen to highlight the best features of the game. But that puts that makes things kind of imbalanced towards selecting games that have really high graphical fidelity. They look really good as a screenshot, but the sort of the way that it actually works underneath the hood is of lesser priority in terms of marketing, because, well, as long as it looks good, people are going to buy the game. And then, if it turns out it's glitchy, well, they've already spent money, so who cares? So there's a huge pressure in terms of marketing. So that's the this is that's the this is what I've been thinking about with all of this, and this was all just stemming from me looking at Minecraft and seeing how crappy it is, honestly. And there's something else with Minecraft. This is a little bit of a tangent, but with this adding everything in and never going back. For anyone who played RuneScape back in the day, I was very happy to see the return of classic RuneScape. Essentially, what happened with RuneScape is they followed the same model where they tried to keep players engaged and bring in new players by, oh, we're adding in this. The world is much more complicated now, and even though obviously that was never the central appeal of RuneScape, it wasn't like making things look really good. You have super low poly models. Same with Minecraft. It wasn't looking good was never the looking like highly realistic was never the point of Minecraft. It's not the appeal of it. So with RuneScape, what happened is they made all these additions to try and pull players in and to try to keep player engagement. And then, of course, what happened is the opposite, that over time, fewer and fewer people started playing. And so after a while, they released Classic RuneScape, which was just the original RuneScape, except they implemented a great feature, which I'm still surprised does not exist in more games, especially ones that are constantly updating, adding DLCs, adding new updates and patches and things like this. That every new change they made, you can players in RuneScape, in the classic RuneScape, they would still be updating it, but every new change would go to voting boxes, and so players could go to the voting boxes and vote on whether they liked the new update, the new change, or whether they didn't. And I think that's a great model. It would be something really nice for Minecraft. Anyway, I wish that games, all of this is related to the content of my Elden Ring critique, which I'm hoping I'll get done tonight, and so I can publish it tomorrow. The sort of theme here being, maybe you don't need to build your games to make them so much, to add so much to them and to make them so complicated. I would say it's probably better to have a working game than one that has some amazing features that don't work. I think that doesn't seem too controversial, but it does seem to be the opposite of the way the gaming industry is moving. So, okay, now that I've got that off my chest, I'm gonna head out. So, thanks for watching. See you next time.